Good evening, everyone. We've just passed 5:30 and we'll make a start. Before we move into the meeting, I just want to let everyone know that afterwards, if we can go down the stairs by the coffee platform, because apparently there's a quiz on in the atrium. So unless you want to sort of be part of the quiz. Anyway, let's moving on. The other thing that I need to let people know formally is that item 14 on the agenda, paper BCA 1939, has been withdrawn this evening. Okay, apologies for absence.
We have apologies from Councillor Malvisi and Councillor Osborne.
Thank you. Declaration of interests by councillors. No declarations?
Well, can I ask a question? Might be a silly question, but if we're a parish councillor, do we have to declare? No, we don't. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Right, the next item on the agenda is paper BCA 1932, confirm the minutes of the meeting that we had on the 9th of January. If I just pull that up here on my screen. So going through that, does anyone have any issues over the first page, second page, third, fourth page, so can I have a vote in favour of accepting those minutes, please? All those in favour? Yep. Okay, thank you. Right. The next item then is paper BCA 1933, to confirm the minutes of the second meeting we had last month on the 16th of January. Again, first page, second page, third page, and fourth page. Any points anyone wants to raise on those minutes? If not, may I have a vote, please? All those in favour? Thank you. Right, the next item, to receive notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received.
Next item, questions by councillors.
None received.
And the next item, matters referred by the Overview and Scrutiny or Joint Audit and Standards Committees.
We haven't got Councillor McCraw here. He's given his apologies.
Has he?
Yeah.
Right, okay. Councillor McCraw has given his apologies, but you'll see in your agenda pack that there's some minutes from Overview and Scrutiny that they're minded to approve the budget, General Fund and HRA budgets, and do thank the finance team for their efforts in putting those together. The only other minute they've provided here is on the corporate plan outputs, and there is a recommendation which we'll be taking as part of the discussion and the debate on that item later in the agenda. And this is to ensure that we've got a range of methods in place to engage with members, and we'll be discussing that when we cover this item. The next item, the forthcoming decisions list, which everyone will have got a link to. Are there any questions regarding the forthcoming decisions list? Councillor Busby.
Well, just clicked on the link. And it doesn't actually give me the list. I can download it, I guess, from the paper.
There is a further, on the page you've got there.
Here's another link.
There is another link, yes. And you can either download and save it or open it immediately.
Yeah, this is becoming far too complicated for a simple man like myself. And do we actually need a new decisions list every week? The more often we get them, the less inclined I am to read them.
So it's entirely up to you whether you wish to read them or not. We publish them when things are added to them so that you've got the most up-to-date position. The reason why you've got to click another link, which is irritating, I accept, is because that document changes. And so if we took you direct to the relevant PDF, that link would only be any good for the relevance of that PDF document, but by going to the main link itself, then you will always be able to click onto the most recent PDF. We are by law required to publish forthcoming decision lists in relation to key decisions 28 days prior to those decisions being sought. So that's why we have to publish it on a regular basis to make sure, particularly in relation to key decisions and particularly in relation to confidential or proposed confidential decisions, you have a much broader forthcoming decision list that covers all things coming to Cabinet and all things coming to Council, so that both yourselves, all councillors, all members of the public and scrutiny can see what's coming up in the forthcoming period. But if you don't want to look, it's fine.
Whilst I'm having a general moan, when you send out a revised agenda, can the revised agenda include all the items, not just the bit that you've revised? Because we've now got kind of 3 emails to try and find, and I noticed that every time we log out of a paper, it logs us right back to the original email, and we have to come back into the meeting's agenda. I mean, it just brings back paper.
Yeah. If I can just check, I'm going to look across to my colleagues. Is everything correct on modern.gov? Yes. So if members use modern.gov, which is the source of all documents, you will find it's constantly up to date.
Okay. Councillor Davis.
Sorry to contradict, but I've just opened, I've got a model cover here and it's still got the paper in there, so it's not entirely up to date. It's still got the joint area parking management plan.
Yes, so it will have the joint area parking plan. We're not that good. The leader withdrew that at the beginning of the meeting, and not before. We're efficient, but we're not that great.
Okay. Right. Everyone happy with the forthcoming decisions list? Yes. Great. Thank you very much. Moving on to the next item then, that's paper BCA 1934, the General Fund Budget for 2020 to 2021 and the 4-year outlook. Okay. Right, I'm not going to go through a detailed report because I did last time when we looked at this last month, and I will be again at full council later this month. So I just want to go through some of the changes that have taken place in the budget since we last looked at it last month. So now, in terms of both the latest document you've got and the new papers, which are in the latest email, we're now looking at a general fund budget that requires £506,000 of the 2020 to 2021 new homes bonus receipts, £1.2 million of Section 31 grants, and £227,000 of the Rural Service Delivery Grant, and £278,000 from our earmark reserves in order to balance the budget. We're now using 48% of the anticipated new homes bonus, and the rest will be transferred to the Transformation Fund. The overall budget gap now for the next 4 years is a cumulative £1.1 million, as shown in Table 9. But the good news is that we're now predicting a surplus this coming year of £711,000, which is significantly more, an improvement of £163,000 since we last looked at this position last month. There are a number of movements that have been outlined in the amendment which was sent to you earlier this week, I believe, which explains that £163,000 difference. 5 of them relate to business rates following the completion of the NNDR1 returns that were submitted recently. We have a full budget book now at Appendix D for 2020 to 2021, and also the revised fees and charges schedule for the forthcoming year is provided in Appendix E. The reserves, again, they're highlighted in paragraph 7.5, table 3. Thanks to the new homes bonus, we've got significant improvement. The transformation fund is now going to be £994,000 as a result of that additional £163,000 that I mentioned earlier. We've got the capital programme again is set out in Appendix B with the spend of £11.4 million, and that is as much as it was when we last looked at it. The only other thing that I want to draw your attention to is Section 12 with the pay policy statement, and that's something obviously we're required to do each financial year under Section 38, Paragraph 1 of the Localism Act 2011. So I'll open this up for debate and questions, but in the meantime I would like to propose the recommendations in paragraphs 3.1 to 3.5 for this forthcoming budget. So any questions, anyone? Councillor Davis.
A question coded almost as a compliment, because I think when we looked at this budget as well as we did last year, we recognised that we were going to have to increase to the maximum, which we've done. It's £5 now, which is most we can do. But I have to say, I think it's entirely impressive that our finance team have worked out the budget, and over last year and this year, no services are cut. You know, we've kept a very steady line, and indeed we've increased it. So I think a lot of credit goes to the finance team, as Scrutiny mentioned as well. And what's wonderful, I think, is that we can use this money for our communities, and I think it's important that we do that. We don't just stash it all in the reserves. I understand we need to have a strong reserve, and I think that's absolutely right. But we also need to recognise lots of things, and obviously in my community portfolio, I'm going to be asking for certain monies for certain things that will benefit the communities, and I'm sure my fellow portfolio holders will be doing exactly the same, whether that be in business rates and all sorts of ways. But I think it's a good budget, and it's a very positive thing going forward as well.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I agree. It's a very good position for the forthcoming year, and despite the projected shortfall over the medium-term period, I'm sure that one way or another we'll be able to bridge that gap, and we're on a sound footing, and we're in good hands. Anyone else? Councillor Arthey.
Only really to say that I think somebody ought to say that we haven't got very much to talk about today, and that's because there's about 3 months of hard work have gone on before today. There's been a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, as Derek has said, a lot of help from the finance team to get to where we are, which is a good place, as you've said. So yeah, I'm happy with where we've got to and how we got there.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, I've proposed the recommendations. Would anyone, may I have a seconder? Councillor Davis. All those in favour of the general fund budget? Thank you. Okay, moving on then. The next item is paper BCA 1935, the Housing Revenue Account budget for 2020 to 2021 and the longer term outlook. Right. Okay, again, as with the general fund budget, I don't propose to go through the full report that I've got here. I'll save that for council. But there are some slight changes since the last time we looked at this. Most notably, the fact that Appendix B now has a full 30-year business plan and details of that attached, which is useful because we are working on a 30-year business plan. The other thing, in terms of our reserves, again, over the 30 years, we've got the detail now, and that shows a slight reduction, 12.9 million to 12.6 million over that period. And with the debt repayment profile showing all debt repaid by 2049 to 2050. The other main difference is that there's an improvement of £41,000 since we last looked at it as a result of changes to employee costs. This is rebalancing employee costs between the general fund and the HRA. So we now have a surplus position of £334,000, which is obviously a significant improvement on last year, which was the deficit of £193,000. So again, that's all I wish to say, apart from on the capital programme, that there has been a change to the numbers of housing that we're intending to build. We were showing 229 affordable homes and I think 15 shared ownership. It's actually 156 affordable homes now and 23 for shared ownership. And that is, the last time we looked, the numbers hadn't been updated from the previous year, and we're showing the period 2019 to 2020 through to 2022 to 2023, as opposed to what it should be showing as of now, the period 2020-21 through to 2023 to 2024. So that's why there's a slight change in those numbers. It's not showing a decrease in the amount of houses we're building, it's just looking at a different period. So again, I would like to propose the recommendations at paragraph 3.1 to 3.9. And would anyone like to ask any questions or make a comment on the HRA budget? Councillor Arthey.
Yeah, I've got a question, and it's a strange one really, because a few months ago I thought, and I'm not quite sure why I thought this, that a 2.7% increase in council house rents was £2.19 on average, and it's actually £2.38, and I'm not quite sure whether I got something wrong or whether in the early days of talking about this the figure was different.
Catherine, do you have an answer for that?
I think the £2.19 figure is the mid-Suffolk equivalent. So, yeah, 238 is the Babergh figure.
Yeah. Thank you, that was obviously my mistake there. The only other thing to say is really the same as I said about the general fund. I mean, there's a lot of work gone into this over the months. And once again, yeah, we've got there in the end. And if you need a proposal, I'm happy to propose it.
Well, I propose, but you'll second. Yeah.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Busby, sorry.
Thanks, Chair. I think there might be too much work that's gone into it, quite frankly. Just because you can have a graph like that, I'm not certain it actually says anything. And I have comments like that come up with the other reports as well. I think sometimes you're putting things into these reports because you've got the ability to do it, even though it doesn't actually tell us anything. So I prefer, in my view, less is more. Thank you. It's the HRA 30-year.
Yeah, I have it here, yeah. Well, it is what it is. It's showing graphically that it's pretty stable over that period with some minor variations.
But what are you going to do with that information? Are you going to change any of our decisions or our approach? Does it make you feel comfortable? Does it make you sleep well at night? I mean, I don't know. Just because you can put that kind of a graph HRA in future, Chair, is it our intention to continue with rent increases of CPI plus 1%, or is this just for this 1 year?
That is the intention, isn't it? Catherine?
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Gavin.
I mean, ultimately, the decision making will be year on year when we come to budget setting. The standard that the government have applied allows councils to increase by that percentage each year, but obviously that will be a decision taken by members year on year based on the HRA business plans at that point.
We've built it in at the moment, but obviously it's something that could be changed. It's part of the current business plan because we've got increase by CPI plus 1% for 5 years, and the remaining 25 years CPI only.
it just seems a shame that we're increasing people's rent more than inflation. There's maybe a good reason for it, which is over a 30-year period we need to have sufficient to repay our debts. If that's the case, then I guess that's fine, but it just seems a shame. Having reduced their rent for the last 2 or 3 years, now to put it up, it doesn't seem a great deal, perhaps to the majority of us, £2.38 a week or £2.19, but by the very nature of people that are in these council houses, it could mean quite a bit, especially if it keeps going up.
Arthur.
I'm sure members are aware of this, but just to reiterate the point, if they aren't, that reduction in rent over the last 4 years, of course, wasn't something you did out of choice. That was something that was imposed on you by government. The key thing is it depends, to my mind, what your aspirations are more broadly in terms of building houses as well, because it is effectively a single budget that's ring-fenced. Certainly I would subscribe to the view that you should be trying to provide the best quality homes you possibly can for the lowest possible rent, but that is a challenge inevitably, and it's where that breaks in terms of also trying to build yet further homes at the same time.
But it's only the 1% above inflation for 5 years. Beyond that, the business plan is based on an inflationary rise only. Yeah. Okay, the next item is paper PCA 1936, the Joint Capital Investment and Treasury Management Strategies for 2020 to 2021. So I'm pleased to introduce report PCA 1936, the Joint Capital Investment and Treasury Management Strategies for 2020 to 2021. This is the second year that we are considering separate documents for each of these, for the strategy statements and the prudential indicators following the new guidance issued by both SIPFA and the MHCLG. There are a number of appendices here. Appendix A provides the capital strategy and summarises the capital expenditure and financing requirements of the full capital programme for both General Fund and HRA. And the details of that are provided in the budget report, which was attached as an appendix to the General Fund document earlier. So this appendix sets out the capital expenditure and capital investment decisions and the associated risks and rewards, along with how risk is managed for future financial sustainability. The capital expenditure for the next 4 years is shown in Table 1, paragraph 2.3, and the financing shown in Table 2, paragraph 2.11. And these show that the total capital expenditure planned for 2020 to 2021 is £32.89 million. Most of this is in the General Fund, which will be funded by borrowing. The appendix also includes the prudential indicators which demonstrate that the investment plans that the Council has are affordable, prudent and sustainable, and that the decisions are made according to good practice. And tables 1, 4, 6, 8 and 9 illustrate the affordability and impact of capital expenditure decisions and set out both Council's overall capital and treasury framework. Borrowing is measured against two benchmarks, the capital financing requirement and liability, and this is shown in tables 6 and 7. The capital financing requirement measures the underlying need to borrow for capital purposes. And this, together with the usable reserves, is one of the core drivers of both Council's treasury management activities. It measures the cumulative outstanding amount of debt finance, and this increases with new debt finance capital expenditure and reduces with the MRP and capital receipts used to repay debt. So Babergh's capital financing requirement is expected to increase by £21.34 million to £177.77 million, and the outstanding debt to increase by £15.25 million to £138.21 million. Statutory guidance says that debt should remain below the capital financing requirement, except in the short term. Appendix B outlines the investment strategy and details the expenditure items in the capital programme that specifically relate to assets bought or owned by the councils to generate a return or for regeneration or development of the local area. In this context, the investments mean the non-treasury management activities, which are described separately in Appendix C. It explains how each investment contributes to the Council's priorities and the security, liquidity and risk. And both councils are continuing to develop their property and commercial portfolios either by purchasing them directly or through the Council's investment companies. Appendix C sets out the Council's borrowing requirement in the Treasury Management Strategy, and also the Treasury Management Investment Strategy. It also includes the list of approved investment counterparties and the limits. Table 1 at paragraph 3.3 is the key table here, showing the breakdown of the capital financing requirement over the next 4 years, and it shows that both councils have an increasing capital financing requirement due to the capital programme and investments. Appendix D contains the Treasury Management Indicators, which we use to measure and manage the Council's exposure to Treasury management risks. Appendix E provides the latest economic update and interest rate forecast. And following the Bank of England decision to hold interest rates at 0.75% last November, Arlene Close, our Treasury advisors, are now forecasting that it is likely to remain at this level for the foreseeable future. Appendix F describes the current investment and debt portfolio, showing the position at the 30th of November 2019. At this point, the external borrowing for Babergh was £102.54 million, of which £96.54 million is Public Works Loan Board borrowing and £6 million is the short-term borrowing. Our investments at that point were £13.87 million. That includes the CCLA, Funding Circle, UBS and Schroders investments. And we've continued the policy of withdrawing funds from Funding Circle as loans drop out, and neither have we invested any new money in Funding Circle. Appendix G provides the Treasury Management Policy Statement, which underpins the strategy and sets out both councils' regard to the monitoring of risks and performance. And the primary objectives remain security of capital, then liquidity, followed by return. Appendix H is the minimum revenue provision statement, which shows where we put aside the resources to repay debt in later years. Appendix I lists institutions meeting high credit rating criteria. And finally, Appendix J is a glossary of terms. Now, we have a number of recommendations, 3.1 to 3.8, and I would certainly like to propose recommendations 3.1 to 3.7, but I do have a problem with recommendation 3.8, which was added by the Joint Audit and Standards Committee recently. I believe that while I fully understand the sentiment about looking at alternative investment strategies that take greater account of the Council's own declaration of a climate change emergency, I believe that our primary focus on our investments is to maximise our return so that we've got income to guarantee services to our residents. Also, the sentiment behind it, which is perhaps to divest from fossil fuel companies, I think is wrong-headed and ignores the fact that these companies are increasingly becoming energy companies. They are looking at alternative sources of energy. Indeed, only these companies have got really the wealth and the resources to be able to exploit alternative energy sources effectively for our future. And I can't see any of them doing anything that would jeopardize their own futures and their returns to their investors. So I think that this particular additional recommendation is not going to offer any suitable extra benefit to us. But I'm happy to take comments and answer any questions from members of the Cabinet before we go forward to propose the recommendations. Councillor Arthey.
Yeah, I'll ask a question about that. It is, do we know what 3.8 was supposed to achieve? Because it doesn't specifically mention energy companies, it doesn't actually mention any specific sort of company or areas of investment. It's just sort of like a general thing.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering there must have been a thinking behind it that it was going to achieve a change. So what is it that somebody thought we needed to change?
There was a debate at Joint Audit and Standards initiated by some of the members of that committee. And the debate did focus around a discussion of whether companies such as the oil companies and gas companies were the right things for us to be investing in going forward.
Right. Well, I mean, the way it's worded, it says that we should all, that's all members and working parties, should be exploring alternative investment strategies. So that implies an alternative to what we're doing at the moment, but it doesn't actually say which bits have to change. You've just mentioned, I don't know what they're getting at. Are they getting at energy companies? Are they getting at tobacco companies? Are they getting at alcohol companies? What are they talking about? A pension fund? What sort of investments are they talking about? Is it a general type of thing, or are they actually aiming on something specific that we do, which they don't want us to do anymore?
I think from the nature of the debate at audit and standards, it was the latter. But if I go back to what I was saying earlier about Appendix B, which outlines our investment strategy, and the comment I made that that particular appendix explains how each investment contributes to the council's priorities and their security, liquidity and risk. It also what was the other thing I mentioned? Sorry, if you can just bear with me a second. I'm going to have to look for this.
Doing that, if I could just say, if the example you gave, I think, was an energy company, if I can mention one, Shell, they used to be seen as an oil company, and they're now an energy company, so they're looking at all sorts of, because they want to stay in the market if people aren't burning fossil fuels anymore, so they're looking at renewables, they're looking at alternatives. So does that make them a responsible company or an irresponsible company, and should we even be making that judgment when we're looking at the investment strategy? I'm not quite sure.
Well, I agree with what you're saying, Councillor Arthey, and what I found out the comment I wanted to refer to. The primary objectives remain security of capital, liquidity, and return. So I don't see that we should adopt any different strategy than that. Councillor Parker, then Councillor Busby.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got reservations around 3.8 and the way it's worded, frankly. The other recommendations, 3.1, 3.7, are very specific.
Yeah.
3.8, I concur with what Councillor Arthur is saying. It's just a very badly drawn proposal, actually. I think the phrase, whatever mechanisms, it's just incredibly vague. Set up, commence exploring alternative investment strategies. It doesn't mean anything, I'm afraid. So I understand the sentiment, and I think that a better worded proposal might find favour, but I don't know what we're voting for here, frankly.
Councillor Busby.
Well, I think the simple thing, you said it, that our major concern is return. And I think what this motion is trying to suggest is that there should be another item that we take into account, which is climate change. I'll give you an example. In planning, we try and press the developers to build the kind of houses that are going to be good for the climate, energy neutral, etc. If they adopted the same approach to their investments that you're suggesting we do, they're going to say, no, that doesn't give us the best return. We want to build these houses which don't comply with your requirements on climate change. And so if we want other companies that we deal with to follow that principle, we should be doing that ourselves. What I'm saying, I think, is that there's another aspect to investment other than return that we now need to take into account. And I think that's it's not very cleverly worded, but I think if you drop the word alternative, it suggests that we should look at items for investment that will deal with the climate change emergency.
Yeah, I agree with both of those. I'm not happy with the wording of this 3.8. But a more general question is, do we have a list of, if you like, banned investment? So, for example, do we have a list that we don't invest in gambling companies or arms manufacturers or anything like that? And if so, where can that be found?
Catherine, can you answer that?
I think the problem we have with this area, and it's probably mostly relates to our pooled funds, because we have investment in pooled funds that have shares in a wide range of companies. So it's very difficult for us to be specific if we want to invest into that pooled fund to say don't invest our money in a particular company. So I think that might have been the area of investment that during audit and standards we're trying to address. But say we don't hold lists of absolutely every single company that the pooled funds we invest in, who they've got shares in. So I think that was sort of the issue that they were trying to address with this, and saying perhaps we should consider that element more in terms of where we invest the money in future, if that helps.
Thank you. Councillor Holt.
There you go, that's better. To me, they're just words, and words without any real meaning. I just find it, as others have said, that you look at it and what does it mean? Is it defined in any way? No, it's not. The others have obvious meanings to them, and I'm more than happy to support the idea of removing 3.8. I just don't see why it's there.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or comments on any other aspect of this paper? Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. Just a technicality, actually, that I picked up in respect of 3.10, Appendix B, 3.10, Babergh's investment in a hotel and restaurant on the council. So, not that it's material to finances particularly, but I notice that it says in here that we're looking at a 24-year lease of a building developed and owned by the council, whereas every document that's come forward thus far with regards to that particular development is 25 years. So I'm just curious to know why that's changed. Not, as I say, not that it's material to the finances particularly, but it's just a technical point. Thank you.
Thank you. Arthur, did you want to come back on that one?
Just in the absence of Emily, because she's not here today. So just to confirm, it is 24 years. It may even be 24 years and 364 days, I think, from memory. But I'd have to go away and check that. Happy to give you a detailed answer outside of the room as to the reasoning.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, anyone? Councillor Arthur.
Yeah, just really to know what we're going to do about this 3.8, was it, or whatever. Are we going to reword it? I mean, I think there's a little bit of sympathy for the sentiment behind it, but nobody seems to think that it works in its currently worded form. So are you proposing that we just delete it, or are you suggesting that we try and accommodate it by changing the words?
I had proposed not including it at all, but Arthur, did you want to say anything?
Simply to say that. So I think based on the conversations that you've been having, I wasn't actually expecting anyone in the room to move it based on the conversation you had, and therefore you wouldn't even need to vote on that. You'd simply be moving the other recommendations, not that particular one. Having said that, there is some sentiment, I think, within the room to the notion of making sure that our investments are ethical and that our investments are mindful of the impact in relation to the climate. And so without moving a specific recommendation, certainly that's something that officers can take away, and we can have the conversations, taking to the point that Catherine Steele raised earlier as to how we might go about doing that. We may need to go away and give that further thought. We'll take that away without you needing to formally put a motion.
Sorry, my microphone wasn't on. Moving on. So that's been approved. The next item is...
Could Arthur's reply to Lee's question about the 25 years and the 24 years, 364 days, be included in the minutes of this, please?
I would suggest not doing that, but I'm happy to make sure that it's circulated to all members.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Next item, paper BCA 1937, business rates discount policy. Recent government business rate discounts were temporary measures and local billing authorities had to use their discretionary relief powers to grant relief. The government reimburses local authorities for their local share of the discretionary relief using a grant under Section 31 of the Local Government Act 2003. Last year, we approved the introduction of a local discretionary retail discount policy to implement these. And Appendix A contains our current business rates relief policy, which lists the types of business that are eligible for relief. The government announced further changes to business rate discounts in the Queen's speech on the 19th of December 2019. And it stated that it will increase the retail discount from 1/3 to 50% and includes cinemas and music venues within the scheme. It proposed extending the duration of the local newspaper discount. And finally, it introduced an additional discount for pubs. At the time of writing this report, no further details have been provided by the government. It is assumed that due to the temporary nature of these discounts, local billing authorities will again be asked to use their discretionary power to implement these discount changes. There is a short timescale to introduce these discounts from the 1st of April, the next financial year, so that they are included on the business rates bills issued for 2020 to 2021. The Shared Revenues Partnership is currently due to issue the bills on the 11th of March. There are three options open to us, listed in paragraphs 2.1 to 2.3 of your report, but to meet this timeline, we now need to delegate authority for the final decision making, i.e. option 1. So I'd like to propose a recommendation at paragraph 3.1 of the report that Cabinet gives authority to the Assistant Director Corporate Resources in consultation with the Cabinet members for Finance and the Leader to agree a local discretionary discount for pubs, update the current retail discount policy and extend the local newspaper discount once the government has provided the full details of the schemes. Does anyone have any questions? Councillor Holt.
Questions, no statement really, just comment. I think obviously this is very welcome. It's not in the detail that we would want, as in it's not a full review, and I think most businesses out there will welcome any help they can get. I think we do need to see obviously a full revaluation of the whole business rates operation, but obviously that's something hopefully the government will come to in the near future. So I'm more than happy to support this recommendation in that let the officers get this done as soon as possible. But as I say, I think it's a small step, but there's a lot more needs to be done by government in this matter.
Thank you. Anything from anyone else? Okay, may I have a seconder for this? Councillor Holt. All those in favour? Thank you. Right, the next item is paper BCA 1938, and that's the outputs for the 2019 to 2023 to support the delivery of the Joint Corporate Plan. I'm pleased to introduce report BCA 1938, the 2019 to 2023 outputs to support the Joint Corporate Plan. This report sets out the key outputs that we propose for that 4-year period. These outputs support the delivery of the 6 strategic priorities in the Joint Corporate Plan agreed by the Council in October. We believe their successful delivery will take us a long way towards realising our vision for Babergh and Mid-Suffolk, as it's a joint corporate plan, to be places with great communities with bright and healthy futures that everybody is proud to call home. Each of the 6 priorities are supported by their own strategies, with the environment strategy currently under development and being influenced by the member working group, and the wellbeing strategy scheduled for development in the coming months. We will also be refreshing our economic development strategy over the next few months. These strategies will set out the key outcomes under each theme and will be underpinned by detailed action plans. You will see that the outputs for 2019 to 2020 include detailed in-year milestones. More detailed plans for these proposals for delivery in the period 2020 to 2023 will be worked up over the coming months and will form part of action plans to accompany each strategy. We want to emphasise that the outputs identified at this stage are not exhaustive, and we expect to add to these over the next few years. And indeed today, following discussions with Mid-Suffolk, I would like to add 5 additional outputs to the recommendations, and you have those in the addendum that's sitting in front of you now. These in the main build on work that has already started but needs further development. And just to summarise, these are to promote sustainable new homes across the district by increasing the available advice, address fuel poverty while improving energy efficiency and reducing carbon emissions, improve tree cover across the district, improve democratic engagement with our residents, and finally to review and improve the planning enforcement activity. We also recognise the role of effective programme and project management in the successful delivery of these outputs, and programme boards chaired by the Chief Executive and the Strategic Director have been established to monitor the progress of projects, take an overview of interdependencies between projects and address the risks, barriers and resource implications. A new project management approach has been developed over the last year. More than 60 staff are currently taking part in project management training. Monitoring and reporting on the delivery of the corporate plan's outputs will take place in a number of ways. Corporate performance indicators are currently being revised for 2020-2021 onwards to align with the new corporate plan. Progress on the plan will be reported and monitored through the quarterly performance reports to Cabinet. Ongoing reporting will take place at the regular Cabinet portfolio holder meetings with Assistant Directors and Corporate Managers. Internal audit will continue to ensure that relevant controls are in place and report to the Joint Audit and Standards Committee. The detailed list of intended outputs in this report will enable the Overview and Scrutiny Committee to identify key areas for further exploration well in advance when developing their own forward plans. And finally, we recognise the importance of all member engagement in the corporate plan outputs. And this comes back to the recommendation from Joint Overview and Scrutiny. And that an all-member briefing session will take place in March 2020 to provide an opportunity for members to gain a greater overall understanding of the six strategic priorities and the strategies that will underpin these. Thereafter, throughout the year, all-member briefing sessions will be themed to cover one strategic priority each. This will enable all members to be involved in more depth, ongoing dialogue with Cabinet members and officers about the individual strategies, action plans, projects and performance for each of the 6 priority areas. I therefore move the recommendation to paragraph 3.1 that Cabinet is recommended to agree the outputs of 2019 to 2023 set out at Appendix 1 of the main report, and also the 5 additional outputs listed at paragraph 1.2 of the addendum report. I now open it up to questions or comments from Cabinet members. Anything from anyone? Councillor Arthey?
A couple of things, really. I don't know who worded these ones on the addendum report, but I've got a couple of... Lee is laughing beside me here. I've got a couple of issues, and they're to do with the planning portfolio, perhaps not surprisingly. The first one is promote sustainable new homes across the district. That's absolutely fine. But who put by increasing available advice? Because that's not actually the way that you achieve that. There's nothing wrong with increasing available advice. I support that too. But if all we're going to do is increase advice, that might not actually lead to any more sustainable or more homes that are sustainable. So I'm not quite sure about that. So perhaps it ought to stop after district, so it just says promote sustainable new homes across the district, and you could perhaps say including increasing the available advice or something like that. The next one I've got a bit of an issue with, again, is planning portfolio, is 1.25, review and improve planning enforcement. Now, I'm all for improving planning enforcement and I'm doing my best to improve it, but one of the problems that you've got is actually how do you measure that improvement? Do you measure it by the number of cases we're dealing with and therefore getting rid of some cases is an improvement? Do you measure it by the number of prosecutions or notices served or something like that? Is that an improvement? So I'm not quite sure how you would measure improvement in planning enforcement. The review is being undertaken, fairly obviously, but I really don't know how anybody thought that they were going to measure this improvement. It's just like somebody's put in improve, because hey, we want to improve everything, don't we?
I've got, firstly, Arthur would like to come back on that, and then I've got, Cathy, sorry, was it? And then I've got Councillor Holt and then Councillor Parker.
So first of all, in terms of reviewing and improving the planning enforcement, as you know, Phil Isbell is working through an improvement plan at the moment, and as part of that, he is looking at some ways in which he can measure that improvement, whether it's a reduction in complaints, whether it's some other measures of increased satisfaction from amongst members and others. So Phil is looking at that at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely no, he is, because I'm involved in that as well. The thing that I'm not quite sure about is that we're actually stating here that we're going to improve planning enforcement. I hope we're going to improve the way it's done, so I hope that there are going to be improvements within the planning enforcement team. That's improvements in the way that the service is delivered, if you like. But I'm just not quite sure how you would measure the sort of the what are the outputs from the enforcement team. I'm not quite sure how you would measure that. Yeah, I can't remember. You just gave an example which I didn't agree with, which I think was a reduction in the number of cases. That is not necessarily, or complaints. That's not necessarily an improvement. It's just a reduction in the number of complaints. So I'm not quite sure about that.
Arthur.
So I'll try and assist. As you've already pointed out, essentially this work is already underway. So in some respects, adding it to the list on one level doesn't do an awful lot, because that review and that improvement work is underway. I'll come back to the word improve in a moment. The key thing, and the reason for suggesting that it should be added here, though, is that it's of such importance to all councillors, and is regularly part of my inbox from councillors, that it should sit alongside those other strategic corporate outputs that you see on the wider list, and that it has therefore of such weight, if you like, for councillors, that it's right and proper. We're not suggesting improve all services, because that's so generic and pointless that we wouldn't for 1 minute suggest adding that on. But this one, we took the view was of such significance it should be added. In terms of improvement, without cheating, I will throw the ball back slightly to Councillor Arthur in terms of, as he says, it sits within his portfolio. I think the challenge is exactly that, is to determine what the right indicators are that will help all councillors determine that there has been an improvement. But I suspect all councillors will agree that there should be an improvement. So the challenge is not whether or not the word appears, but absolutely, and I would argue it's not one indicator, it will be a suite of indicators, because, as you say, to simply see a reduction in the number of complaints could be triggered by a whole host of reasons, not least you could withdraw the service. And people can't complain because it doesn't exist. Equally, it could be greater enforcement activity, but that isn't necessarily a sign of success in that regard. Having to take more enforcement in some respects is a sign of failure, because we're having to intervene more often. Success, to my mind, is compliance with planning without us needing to take further actions, which is a cultural change. But the one bit I would just add while I'm talking is, of course, and members will be aware of this, is carrying out building works ahead of seeking planning permission, of course, is not an offence. You're allowed to do that. The system allows you to do that. I'm sure councillors and I would agree that that's a nonsense, but that is the system that we have. The assumption is that you have to apply for planning permission before you do something, but that isn't actually the case. So that does demonstrate the challenge. In terms of your first point, you asked also about the promoting sustainable homes. The wording itself comes to you via Mid-Suffolk, via the opposition groups. So these proposals were alongside a further 5 proposals that were put forward. 5 of them were already in your list. So you'd already determined that there were things that you wanted to do, and so they're already in the appendix. The other 5 are close to things that you're already doing, but add a little bit extra context. But particularly in relation to that one, for example, our assessment as officers at the moment is that the detail as to what was being proposed wouldn't work, but the sentiment was the right thing. And so effectively what we wanted to include was the sentiment, and then go away and do further work to establish, well, what is the activity that will actually deliver this ambition?
So it's not only just in giving advice. It's actually, so, I don't think it's very well worded, but if it's Mid-Suffolk's wording and if it's the one that we've got to go with, then so be it. I suppose the same thing applies to 125. The only thing that I would say about your response is that we're not doing the review to make things worse. So I think it's blatantly obvious that the review is to improve the situation. My question was about how you actually measure that improvement, which is a lot more difficult. So in my book, of course we're doing the review to make things better, but to say that we're actually reviewing and improve, well, we're reviewing and the intention is that things will get better, but review and improve to me has got a sort of a measurable achievement on it, and I know that Phil is hoping to be able to use a variety of statistics to show a sort of a direction of travel. That there is no one statistic that tells you whether enforcement is getting better or worse, whether it's good or bad.
I think that's absolutely correct. The other element I would add is that another form of measure, and again, a challenge to actually measure it, but doesn't mean it's not right, is, for example, confidence in the planning system overall. And enforcement is only one component of that. But again, a greater confidence from our residents that in the planning system, in the quality of the planning system, the quality of the decisions and the reasoning sitting behind the decisions, enforcement forms one part of that. But I absolutely agree with the point, which is working out what the appropriate measures are, and it is a suite of measures to help determine are we genuinely making improvements, is the challenge, but that doesn't mean you don't try and improve. No.
Councillor Holt.
Yeah, again, this is almost as if it's been imposed on us by Mid-Suffolk. You've got a Cabinet Member for Planning who obviously knew nothing about these and is questioned quite rightly. We've not got the Environment Cabinet Member here, so God knows if she knows about them. Obviously, John, you're here, whether you knew about this, but at the 11th hour, we're just given these additions. They're lovely words again, wonderful meanings, but the Cabinet Member's not aware of it. Do we really need these put in here? The corporate plan has been discussed with all the Cabinet Members in the past. We've gone through it quite thoroughly, and yet these are thrust upon us like this. I just don't see it. I'm sorry. We've got our corporate plan. As I say, they're lovely words, fantastic, but I don't like the way it's done. I just feel as though these are chucked in here at the last minute. We're just meant to sign them off. No debate, no comment. I know we can do this now, but it's not really the place to be doing it.
Arthur.
So, yes, welcome to the joys of joint working between two councils. I agree entirely. You do not have to sign up to these. This is what we wouldn't want to do, is present you in a position whereby Mid-Suffolk has agreed something and you weren't aware that they'd agreed it, so to speak, and that's why it's come to you relatively at the 11th hour. I totally accept that.
Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. So my beef is, and thank you to the Chief Exec who's defending this manfully, but my beef with this particularly is they're just, as previously, they're just badly drawn. And in a previous life, I was a union rep years ago, and we were always taught, if you're going to raise a proposal, make it absolutely clear and concise what they mean. You know, Lord alone knows, we take enough flack, quite rightly, from our constituents that we often talk gobbledygook. And to my mind, it's not clear. So just from a technical perspective, I think they're actually out of order. I don't disagree with the sentiment of them. I'm not opposed to them in that respect. But what do they mean? I mean, 1.2.2, address fuel poverty while improving energy efficiency and reducing carbon. That's not one output, that's three outputs. So it's just purely down to technicalities for me. And I think they could be drawn better, frankly.
Yeah, I have a lot of sympathy with that sentiment, Councillor, and from my point of view, the one that I have a lot of problems with is 1.2.4, the democratic engagement. It's something we're doing all the time anyway, as you well know in your portfolio. It's too woolly in the way it's currently phrased. But yes, Councillor Parker.
Yeah, well, just to endorse exactly that, I mean, that's exactly what I've got written down in my notes here, that it is actually already part of the customer transformation work, and that is an ongoing piece of work. And certainly as portfolio holder for Babergh District Council, I am determined that it will be as clear and as transparent as it can possibly be. And I'm sorry, but these aren't it.
Arthur, and then Councillor Busby after that.
So thank you for the thanks for trying to defend them, although I'm equally quite happy not to defend them in the sense that they're not mine. They are Mid-Suffolk's, and they're not the Mid-Suffolk administrations, they're the Mid-Suffolk's oppositions. But just by way of context, and we've not given you all this context, partly because this is Babergh, this is not Mid-Suffolk, but it's probably useful because the point's been raised. The opposition have put these forward within Mid-Suffolk deliberately in a semi-woolly fashion, and certainly in an uncosted fashion, because they were putting them forward for proposals to have discussion with the administration in Mid-Suffolk and didn't want to go to the effort of working them up fully if they were non-starters. These are the ones which are supplementary to what you already have within your outputs, and there is a 26-page document which sets out toing and froing between officers trying to understand what we think might be meant by these, and setting out a great long list of questions that officers have as to, well, does it mean this? What could we do instead? So, for example, just as a tiny example, there is a more detailed proposal that sits below the democratic engagement one, which isn't something that Mid-Suffolk is currently doing, and isn't something that Babergh is currently doing, which is the creation of a youth council. And as officers, we have questioned whether or not that's the right approach more broadly, and actually if you're going to do democratic engagement, and I would argue there is a huge amount more democratic engagement we could do above and beyond what we currently do. That's not to criticise what we currently do, it's just the fact that it's a never-ending challenge, if you like, that we could adopt. So I would come back to the point, what would be useful for officers to understand is that if there is sentiment amongst these that you would support, and I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that you endorse them within the recommendations tonight, but if there is sentiment amongst these 5 that you endorse, then we will continue to engage you in those discussions as to what that could look like. And if in due course that comes back to specific recommendations, well, then we can put that back in front of you. If it doesn't, then they will be Mid-Suffolk things and not Babergh things, and that is perfectly fine. You are, of course, sovereign councils.
Thank you. Before I go to Councillor Busby and then Councillor Davis, I have a lot of sympathy with what's been discussed so far, because they are very, very broad brush, and a lot of the detail hasn't been put into these, and that concerns me, because it seems to me that they're entry points for the Mid-Suffolk opposition to take control of the corporate plan, which is essentially a joint corporate plan put together by the 2 administrations. And if we deviate from that, then we're losing the purpose of what this is. Anyway, Councillor Busby.
Thank you, Chair. 1.2.3, surely if we do nothing, tree cover will improve because trees grow. So we can tick that one off. I think we've done that one. 1.2.5, Clive, I think I would see something along the line. We reduce the average number of days to deliver a conclusive outcome. Could be a measure. Just a thought. I saw 1.2.4. Is that a personal objective, Leader?
Well,
Democratic engagement.
a personal objective. Are you suggesting that this cabinet and leadership does not engage? We do, and far more than we ever have done in the past. You will know that before the election last year, I went on the rounds around the district on question and answer sessions, something which I fully intend to resurrect again. Our communications with the press and with our residents have improved dramatically. So in terms of a personal objective, I don't have a problem with that. I just have a problem with what it's trying to achieve and what it could open us up to in the future. But anyway, Councillor Davis and then Councillor Hall.
Yeah, I think obviously it's your recommendation, so it's entirely up to you how to do it. But I totally endorse what my colleagues have said, and I also agree with what the Chief Executive has said in terms of, I think we should vote on the original paper and not have the addendums in there. And if there is at a later stage where we look at tree cover, engagement or whatever, then that could come back to us later when it's actually, in a bit more detail. But yeah, when it's done properly, no disrespect to whoever's done this in a hurry, but it's not acceptable. And I think one of the points here as well, and I totally understand the dilemma for officers having to do joint working, But, you know, I think sometimes there needs to realise that we are two separate councils, and we need to be treated as two separate councils. And too many times you see reports that are for Babergh with Mid-Suffolk in it. I'm not going to go into specifics, but it's quite often where there's confusion. So there needs to be a way of you know, officers understanding we are two separate councils. And I appreciate this is the joint paper, but you know, I think you should have certainly been better briefed before this has come forward, and certainly we should have done as well. So, you know, I'm going to leave it down to you what you recommend. But you know where I'm coming from.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Holt.
Yeah, I'd like to say again, I think we should leave these behind, park them to one side. I think as individual cabinet members, if these fall into your portfolio and you think there's any merit in them, and that the suggestion in these phrases aren't already being done, then possibly take it forward. But I'd like to think, I can't speak on behalf of you all, but certainly those that are here, that by what's been said, these are being done anyway. So park them to one side. If there's any merit in it, then come back. But I would not be willing to support that.
Councillor Arthey.
Yeah, I don't want to labour the point, but I just wanted to explore a little bit further where they've actually come from. Because I'm looking here at 9.1, it says both cabinets and the senior leadership team have worked closely together to develop the outputs set out in this report, which I think was absolutely true. These deliberations have been informed by the engagement and consultation that has taken place in the development of the Council's existing recently adopted strategies, the Joint Local Plan, the Visions for Prosperity in Sudbury, Stowmarket and Hadley and Needham Market. Sorry?
No need to read them all out.
Oh, okay. Well, just in case anybody would. What I'm trying to say, thank you. What I'm trying to say is that we've now got 5 here, and it seems to me they've just been jumped on us by the opposition at Mid-Suffolk. They haven't been worked on closely together by both cabinets and the senior leadership team, and they have not been informed by engagement and consultation.
I agree with that. Arthur, do you want to come on?
Well, I was going to agree with that entirely, and it's exactly as you just read out. So, but just to give you again the detail as to where they came from, they have come through the opposition in Mid-Suffolk putting forward alternative budget proposals, not an alternative budget, but alternative budget proposals of things that they would like to see happen. And they've also come as a result of both leaders, Mid-Suffolk's leader, submitting the outputs specifically for scrutiny to review as well, because the outputs went to a joint scrutiny committee. And so the opposition have taken forward the opportunity to speak to their leader in an engaging way, appreciating that the politics in Mid-Suffolk is different, which is a critical factor, and therefore have put forward a list of, I believe, 10 suggestions. And as I said earlier, 5 of those were actually already within the outputs and therefore have been effectively dismissed, but not dismissed out of hand, dismissed because they're already in your own jointly agreed outputs, and 5 were not, and that the leader of Mid-Suffolk was happy that those are areas that she would like to see worked up. And therefore they're simply before you so that you're aware that if officers are working away on that, we need that clarity, because we are absolutely clear, coming back to Councillor Davis's point, we're absolutely clear that you're 2 separate councils. Don't be under any illusions that we're not. But clearly in working that up, whether we're working up for 1 council or whether we're working up for the 2 councils, that's simply that.
Thank you, Arthur. Right, well, unless anyone has any further comment or questions, then I think the general view of Cabinet is that we go back to the original recommendation, that Cabinet is recommended to agree the outputs of 2019 to 2023 set out at Appendix 1 of this report, with no further additions. So I propose that recommendation. May I have a seconder, please? Councillor Holt. All those in favour? Thank you. Right. Okay, everyone. That brings us to the end of our meeting. Next meeting, Thursday, 12th of March 2020 at 9:30 a.m. A morning meeting. Thank you, everyone.